Public expenditure. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Still on live. I'm on live anyway, but okay, we'll move on. Let's see. The light is too much. Is it me or
No, not this one.
I think this one is better. Oh,
It's
nice.
the usual.
Okay. Then what really happened before now? I don't know. Okay. So for public expenditure, it's simply about government spending. What does government spend upon? Government spend on
Merit goods,
merit goods alone,
quasi-merit
public
goods,
goods.
good goods.
Yeah, public goods and government spend on public goods and infrastructure. And whatever government does, it's doing it because it would really improve
Public welfare.
the welfare of the country. So let's read further anyway. Capital expenditure, current expenditure, and transfer payments. Total government spending is equal to current expenditure plus capital expenditure. And this can be broken down as this. So for capital expenditure, for total government spending or total government expenditure, it's about what is being spent on capital, on infrastructure, what's being spent on public goods. Like here they said, capital government expenditure is spending on investment goods. Example are new motorways or roads, new schools, new hospitals, or new street lights. These are items that will be consumed over a period of time longer than a year. So the first item when it comes to capital expenditure is capital government expenditure. And when we talk about capital government expenditure here, we're simply talking about goods that can last for more than a year. That's investment, spending on investment goods like road, construction of bridges, schools, hospitals. These are investments that would last for more than a year. And that's why we call them capital government expenditure. I think that one is clear.
Mm.
Are you fasting today? Yes, I am. What happens about that? So for transfer payments, transfer payments are mainly welfare payments made to individuals such as unemployment benefit, and state pensions. They are payments by government for which there's no corresponding output. Hence, transfer payments are not included in the measurement of GDP. Now, let's look at transfer payments. It's transfer payment because there's no good or services produced in return of that money. So you get this money without you producing any good or exchanging any service. So it is not always going to be part of the measurement of the GDP because it is part of government spending already. Do you get it? So another item when it comes to public expenditure is the transfer payment. And these are payments that they are basically welfare payments, which unemployment benefits, pension, bursary for school for students in school. All these are payments that government gives out without corresponding production. That's why I call them transfer payment. I think transfer payment is clear.
Mm.
Then we have, okay, here they said, okay, debt interest is paid on the national debt by the government. Now let's look at how the national debt, how it comes into reality, how it comes into place. Most of the time, the national debt is the accumulation of government deficits. What's government deficit? Government deficit or budget deficit. What was that?
It's a reduction in the
Deficit, fiscal deficit, fiscal deficit. Mm. Where does government get its spending from?
taxes.
So government gets spending from taxes. That's fiscal. It's part of fiscal policy. It's part of fiscal budget.
Mhm.
So fiscal budget or fiscal expenditure is government plan on the revenue made by taxes. So government expenditure comes from the revenue generated from taxation. So that's fiscal taxation, which government will use to generate revenue. And this is what government is going to spend on. This is what government is going to simply spend. So there's fiscal deficit because the amount in taxation, the amount generated from tax, is not enough for government spending. That's fiscal deficit. So it simply means government is spending what it doesn't have. So if government is spending what it doesn't have, it simply means government is borrowing from financial institutions, from individuals, from International Monetary Fund, from other countries. And that is how government is funding its deficit. It's spending. And accumulated deficit will bring about national debt. So national debt is simply the accumulation of spendings through deficits. Do you get it now? So look at what they said. They said debt interest is paid on the national debt by the government. So why do the government have to take a loan? Why do the government have to go through borrowing? The government has to go through borrowing because it's projected or estimated spending and estimated revenue does not tally. Government wants to spend, oh, for example, the government of Libya wants to spend maybe 100 million dinars. And in terms of revenue, it makes maybe 75 million dinars. So how is it going to fund that budget? It has to fund the budget. The budget has to be executed.
That's where debt comes in.
That's where debt comes in. So accumulated deficits bring about national debt. I think that point is clear.
Yeah.
So government spending, because government is spending more than what it receives, it's going to accumulate to national debt. And this debt has to be paid. One way or the other, government might have to, service the debt, by service the debt or reduce the debt. Either ways, government have to find a way around it. And most of the time, when there's increasing national debt, government might have to increase taxation, which is also a burden on individuals. Is it making sense here?
Yes.
Okay. So that's debt interest, which is also government spending. Then we have current government expenditure. All these are capital expenditure. I think all these are capital expenditure because these expenditures would last for more than a year. Now for current expenditure, so current government expenditure is general government final consumption plus transfer payments plus debt interest. General government final consumption is spending on goods and services that will be consumed within a short time, such as a year. Examples are the wages of teachers or heating and lighting of a hospital. Budget can be analyzed in terms of current and capital expenditure. A government can have a budget deficit, what we're just talking about anyway. A government can have a budget deficit just on its current expenditure. Not only is it not raising taxes and other receipts to pay for the expenditure. So this is generally considered to be undesirable because it will have to borrow to pay for current spending. Tomorrow's taxpayers will have to pay for today's expenditure. That is what I just told you now,
Buy now, pay later.
Yeah, buy now and pay later. No, because government would fund whatever the case might be. Government would ensure that the budget is executed, but in the future, we have to pay back through taxes. That's why they said here. So that's why they said here. Where is it again? You just find it. They said, okay, they said tomorrow's taxpayers will have to pay for today's expenditure. So, however, it is considered reasonable to borrow money to pay for capital expenditure. Taxpayers in the future will benefit from capital expenditure made now. So it can be argued they should be made to pay for their share of capital expenditure made now. So the point about current expenditure is that current expenditure is not really ideal, especially when government has to borrow to finance it. Because if government has to borrow to finance current government expenditure, it simply means the refund will be done by taxpayers. Unlike when government has to borrow to finance capital expenditure. If it is capital expenditure will bring about economic growth, will bring about economic development. So which simply means it increases output in the future. So government, it's ideal for government of a country to borrow to finance capital expenditure than borrowing to finance current expenditure. I think the point is clear now.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between capital expenditure and current expenditure. For capital expenditure, it's long term. It gives, it brings about economic growth, economic development. But current expenditure would only improve the living standard of today. So what would you choose? If you are the president of the country, if you are the president of Libya, you have two choices to make now. Either to finance capital expenditure through borrowing or to finance current expenditure through borrowing. Which one would you prefer to do?
Capital expenditure.
But what about when you're going to finance capital expenditure? So what happens to the citizens when they complain now that, oh, the government is not taking care of us now, because it's an opportunity cost,
Execution.
So what will you do? What will you do? You're going to face criticism from people that the government does not take care of us now. So what will happen? How are you going to convince them? This is where economics come in. You need to convince them by letting them to understand the benefit of starving now to enjoy in the future. That is where you come in as an economist. Most of the time, governments, people in governance, people in government, they lack the expertise of, they are not technocrats, they are not economists. So whenever policy comes, they don't have they don't have
Flexibility.
the flexibility to, to understand the cost and the benefit of whatever decision they are making. And that makes it difficult for them to convince the citizens about their policy. So here it is a known fact that when you invest now, it makes the future to be better. But when you consume now, it reduces your consumption in the future. So the only way your consumption can increase in the future is by investing in now.
Mhm.
So so that is the point anyway. So the point about whatever we've talked about right now, about public expenditure, which has been classified into two, current expenditure and capital expenditure, is that capital expenditure helps in economic development and economic growth. Current expenditure helps in improving the living standard of today.
Mhm.
So that's about that. But whatever happens, you have to understand that if we want to enjoy and government continue to spend through borrowing for today's consumption, it simply means it's going to be a burden of tax on us in the future.
Mhm.
So we move on, right?
Mhm.
So that takes us to reasons for the changing size and pattern of public expenditure. Are you there?
Yeah.
The size of government spending is normally measured as a percentage of an economy's GDP or government spending per capita. So the size of government spending is normally measured as the GDP, as an economy's GDP or government spending per capita. So government will have different views about how much the public sector should provide in terms of goods and services and also social protection for individuals. Decisions about the size of public expenditure will be limited by the financial options available to a government, although not for a government which issues its own currency. The pattern of public expenditure, sometimes called the composition of government spending, is often referred to as public expenditure by function. So, for example, in the EU as a whole, social protection was the largest component of government expenditure or spending in 2016. In the EU 28 countries, this totaled to 19.2% of GDP or 41.2% of all government expenditure. The next biggest component was health spending. For most governments, the composition of government spending includes. So before we go down, the pattern of government spending here. So government is going to spend based on the percentage of its economic GDP or its government spending. So what government of a country will spend on is based on the importance of each sector of their economy.
Mhm.
So mostly they are making an example of the European Union here. They said most EU member states spends more on healthcare, I think. Yeah, the most component they spend on is on healthcare, right? Wait, yes, it's public spending, okay. No, social, wait, let me see again. They say here, oh, they said social protection was the largest component of government spending in the EU. I want to talk about social protection. This is talking about the pensions, unemployment benefits, making the living standards a bit better. So that's what European Union states are spending on. So for social protection here, they say this covers transfer payments such as unemployment benefit, benefit to those on low income, state pensions, benefit for the sick or disabled. It also includes direct in-kind provision of goods and services such as free school meals. So the largest proportion of government spending is on social protection, which simply means government is trying to make life easier for the disadvantaged people in the society. And this might as well reduce the gap between the rich and the poor.
Mhm.
Okay. Health spending, it's also part of government expenditure. And for health, it's merit good anyway. So this includes services provided by state health clinics and hospitals. Education, this includes government spending on primary, secondary, and further education. Public order and safety, this includes spending on the police, prisons, and fire service. Defense, it's also spent on the army, the navy, and the air force. Housing, this includes government spending on building new housing stock owned by the government and maintaining existing stock. Environmental spending, this includes spending on parks and environmental protection measures. Debt interest. This is the interest that the government has to pay on money it has borrowed in the past, the national debt. Over time and between countries, the level and pattern of government expenditure changes. Changes in income, changes in age distribution, and changing expectation are some of the main causes. Now, for government spending, these are all what government is going to spend on. Government is going to spend on government is going to spend on social protection. Government is going to spend on health. Government is going to spend on education. Government is going to spend on public order. Government is going to spend on defense. Government is going to spend on housing, environmental, and debt. All these are part of government spending, and they are either public goods or merit goods. But the amount of money government is going to spend on these things are based on what their budget pattern or their spending pattern is going to be. Okay.
Mhm.
I think these ones are clear, right? These are all government expenditures or government spending. Then, so what government is going to, they said over time and between countries, the level of pattern of government expenditure will change. And what are the reasons why the pattern of government spending will change over time? Reasons are based on one, income, changes in level of income, changes in age distribution. Aging population means government would have to spend more on social protection. And also changing expectation. So what is being expected about the future? And that's basically on government macroeconomic objective. So let's check the first one where they talked about changing in income. The lower the average income of a country, the lower is likely to be the percentage of GDP spent by the government. This is partly because lower income countries lack a tax base, or all the people who pay tax and the total amount that they pay to raise revenue to pay for government spending. Taxes such as income tax and VAT are difficult to administer, partly because in some countries, the population density is very low in some rural regions. It's also easy to avoid in lower income countries because the size of the informal economy is large. Even some transnational will find ways to deliberately avoid paying tax. For all these reasons, tax revenue as a proportion of GDP is typically much lower for poor countries than for high income countries. Now, changing in income. Income could be earned through factors of production like land, labor, capital, and enterprise. But for low income countries, large proportion of low income earners would not even have anything to pay in tax. So which simply means government revenue through taxation will be low in terms of the GDP spent. So which simply means income tax and value-added tax in low income countries will be low. And that simply means government would not be able to spend so much if it depends on income for its spending. And that is the point they are making here. And with this countries like low-income countries would have informal economy because there's no statistic, there's a way people would find out, there's a way people would go around it to bypass law. Transnational companies that are there would, because the country is a developing country, bribery and corruption is rampant, which simply means multinationals might also find a way to avoid tax. So at the end of it all, low-income countries would have low revenue when it comes to taxation, and which simply means government would have few amount of money to spend on public expenditure. And that means government would have to find a way to fulfill their budgets through borrowing. You get changing income patterns here.
Mhm.
Low-income countries low-income countries will have low taxation in terms of revenue for their government from the government to the government. So government would not have enough money to spend to execute their budgets. Changes in level, that's about income. So low-income countries simply has low budget because revenue is always low in such country. And when you talk about high-income countries will have high revenue from taxes, and that allows government spending to increase. So which simply means compared to high-income countries, low-income countries are expected to have large national debt because of increasing deficits to their budget. I think it's clear.
Mhm.
Then we have the other one. Now, changes in level of GDP. The changes in the levels of GDP will also affect the size and the pattern of public expenditure. In a recession, a period of negative economic growth, public expenditure as a proportion of GDP is likely to increase for two reasons. During not during recession, which is a fall in economic activity for two consecutive quarters. Here they said public expenditure as a proportion of GDP is likely to increase for two reasons. Number one, firstly, the government may deliberately choose to spend more, an expansionary fiscal policy to inject money into the circular flow of income, and it's a policy tool used to try to get the economy out of recession. So during recession, it is expected that household income would fall. It is expected that revenue for firms would fall. It is expected that GDP per capita would fall. As a result of this, government might deliberately it's a situation which government has to solve. So a country that is having a low national debt might deliberately use expansionary fiscal policy to take the country out of recession by spending. Expansionary fiscal policy. And what is expansionary fiscal policy? Cutting of taxes or increasing government spending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you get it? So government can use expansionary fiscal policy to take a country out of recession, because recession simply means there's low level of economic growth, or there's economic decline. And economic decline would be, will be linked to unemployment, will be linked to low revenue, low sales, low GDP, low output. So that is why government might deliberately. But if government is going to deliberately do this, it simply means the country is not running through a large national debt. A country that is running through large national debt would be reluctant to come up with expansionary fiscal policy during recession. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So, an expansionary fiscal policy, like I said earlier, so that's the first way in which government can try to use to try to take a country out of recession, expansionary fiscal policy, which is either cutting taxes or increasing subsidy. Secondly, the level of public expenditure is likely to increase because most economies spend some money on welfare payments. So if GDP falls, unemployment is likely to rise. More people will be able to receive unemployment benefits, so spending on welfare payments would also rise. Because there is a fall in economic activity, firms are not selling as they used to sell.
Okay.
They wouldn't have any other choice than to reduce or to lay off workers. So during recession, it is expected that unemployment would
rises.
Increase. Yes, unemployment rises. And that might increase, that might as well increase government expenditure, spending on unemployment benefits.
Yeah, okay.
So spending on welfare benefits means government expenditure would rise. So these are the two reasons why government expenditure may rise during a fall during recession. Thank you. I think that is clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it said even if government spending remains the same in a recession, the fall in GDP during recession will mean government spending as a proportion of GDP would rise. Spending on social protection is also likely to become a greater proportion of government spending in a recession for most economies. However, this will be less true for low-income countries which have a very limited welfare state. That is what I said earlier. Low-income countries might not be able to do this because low-income countries have low budgets. The budgets they execute are done through borrowing. So they already have a large national debt that has to be reduced or to be serviced. So that would not allow them to respond to growing concern about their economy. So they will feel reluctant to deliberately spend more. So they would not want to use spending to take themselves out of recession. Any question about income?
Yes. No.
Yes or no?
No.
Okay, are you sure? Yeah. All right. Changing age distribution. Are you there? For Europe and Japan, the next 30 years will see considerable pressure on governments to increase spending. This is because their population are aging. And Japan is even witnessing that already. With more elderly people in the population and fewer workers, demand for healthcare, pension payments, and social care will rise at the same time as economic growth may fall because of fewer workers. Unless government spending as a percentage of GDP grows, Rises in spending on the elderly will have to come from reduction in other areas of government spending. Changing in age distribution. Here they talked about Europe and Japan. These countries, due to their long life expectancy, they are likely to have a large proportion of their population being aging. So aging population means low productivity, high government spending on welfare. Are you with me, please?
Yep.
I'm going to say that again. Aging population.
I get it. So
You got it right?
yeah.
Okay, great.
So basically, there's a high life expectancy, so people are more likely to live longer. So, and since there's a lot of elderly people, it means a lot of them are retired. So the working population is very small, and the government has to spend on pension.
Thank you. And what do you think brings about this? Why do we have a life expectancy that is higher?
Good healthcare.
Good healthcare. Thank you.
And also fertility rates.
Okay. And what about education? Level of education?
It's high.
Yeah, okay, good. So equally, in countries with a rising birth rate, there will be pressure on the government to spend more on their budget on education, immunization programs to protect children from infections, and the rise in general healthcare expenditure. New schools will need to be built, and the government will have to finance the training and the wages of more teachers. Unless government spending as a percentage of GDP grows increases in spending on education will create an opportunity cost on other components of government spending. Now, I want to ask you, a rising birth rate brings about increase in government spending on
Yes.
healthcare, on education, on food, and the rest. Why is it so?
Because kids need food, and kids need to study, and kids need healthcare.
So do you know the theory in economics that talks about population growing in geometric progression and the production of food is growing in arithmetic progression? Have you heard about that?
No.
We call it Malthusian theory. Malthusian theory. It talks about how the population is growing geometrically and food production is growing arithmetically. So, and that's the reason why we have scarcity. Please put that in your mind, okay, please. Malthusian theory, okay? All right, so, and that is simply what is going to happen here. The population continue to grow in a multiple way, and food production is not increasing in the same rate as the population is increasing. That's the point there. So a country that has large population might have to spend on education, on immunization, healthcare, infrastructure to be able to contain or to be able to, give a better life to the citizens. An increase in the size of the population will also put pressure on public services. So the size of government spending in terms of the amount of money spent is likely to rise. Whether government spending rises as a proportion of GDP will depend on the age distribution of the population. If the population of the working age has increased, then GDP will have risen too. So government spending as a proportion of GDP might remain the same. So if the population is increasing at the same rate as the GDP, government spending would remain the same. If the population is increasing in a larger proportion to the GDP, government spending would increase. If the population is in a low proportion to the level of GDP increasing in relation to the GDP rising in the GDP, government spending would fall. Do you get the relationship here? It's about population and GDP. If the population is increasing in the same rate, if the working population is increasing at the same rate as the GDP, government spending might remain the same. If the working population is increasing at an alarming rate compared to the GDP, government spending would rise.
Yeah.
If the working population is reducing,
but the GDP
GDP is increasing, government spending would fall. If the working population is reducing and the GDP is reducing, government spending would likely remain the same too. But if the aging population is increasing in a rate that is not in the same rate as the GDP, government spending would rise. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
Any question about changes in age distribution. For income, it's about what government is earning through the factor input like land, labor, capital, and enterprise, and what comes in terms of taxation. But for age distribution, it's about how the kind of population we have, the population density. Is it population distribution? Is it aging population or working population?
Working population.
And we can as well talk about what's it again about this population? It's not talked about here, but we can as well talk about it. Uh, is it the active population? No, not active. Um, I think I forgot. Participation rate.
What does that mean?
It's about the percentage of women
I can't remember.
that contributes to the working population.
Okay.
That can also have impact, because if not, government might as well pay for women benefits or domestic benefit or whatever it is anyway.
Okay.
Because women might also fight for their rights. So now we go to changing expectation. The higher the income of a country, the more its citizens will demand higher quality goods and services of the sort that are typically provided by government. When provided goods and services are generally normal or luxury goods, demand for these goods and services tends to be income elastic as GDP rises. Citizens demand, here they said, the higher the income of a country, the more its citizens will demand higher quality goods and services of the sort that are typically provided by government. So government provided goods and services are generally normal or luxury goods. When we talk about normal goods and luxury goods, their YED is what?
Y is greater than 1.
For both normal goods and
No, for luxury goods,
for normal goods,
it's between 0 and 1.
Mohad Al-Gamandi, I'm in Berlin right now. Oh, hi, Mohad. Hope you are doing well.
You know you remember, right?
But he's in Berlin now. Yeah. Wish you all the best, man. Studying mechanical engineering, but I miss your classes. Okay. Wishing you all the best. You're saying hi. Wishing you all the best, man. All right. So, for changing the expectation, when household individuals' income increases, because they have more money, they will be expecting government to provide them with quality goods and services. So normally government would only provide goods irrespective of your income. But if household income is increasing, there's pressure on government to provide goods that is relatively in demand by the citizens, and that's what they're saying here. So as GDP rises, citizens demand better roads, better education, and welfare benefits to guard against sickness, unemployment, and old age. For example, technological advances in healthcare mean that more and more illness are now treatable. However, the additional nursing, the equipment, and the drug needed are all increasing the average cost of health care per person would increase. So here, what they're saying is changing the expectation. If income is expected to rise in the future, or if income is increasing in the country, the pressure is always going to be on government to provide goods and services that meet the expectation of consumers. Because at that point in time, consumers will like, you don't just provide those public transports. We want train, they want quality, they want a better quality product. At that point in time, government might as well have to spend more. And that increases government spending. That's the point they're making here. Because the more improved goods are, the more expensive they become. So, which simply means public expenditure for public goods or merit goods would also rise. That's the point there. Other factors. Among which developed countries, however, there are significant differences in the size of the state. In 2016, for example, the United States had government spending, including transfer payments, of 38% of GDP. By comparison, for France, it was 56%. These differences tend to reflect these differences tend to reflect ideological differences about the role of the state and the role of the market. So, looking at the state, the United States and France, it's simply saying that government spending in the United States is less compared to France.
Because it's more of a free market.
because America, the US is more of a free market compared to France.
which is a mixed economy.
Both of them are mixed economy. Both of them are mixed economy. But the extent to which America is a mixed economy
It's less.
is less compared to France. So which simply means 42% of spending in America is done through the private sector, while 34% is done through the private sector in France. That is the point here. So that means America is more of a pure system than France. I think the point is clear there, right?
Yeah.
So as a result of this government spending, the US will spend less of its budget than France. I think the point is clear there, right? So we'll move on. Resource efficiency, are you there? Some differences in views about the optimal size of the state focuses on how resource efficiency compares between the public and the private sector. If the inefficiency of government is greater than the benefit from correcting market failure, then government should be as small as possible. That's government. If there's government failure, that's the point there. So government around the world and over time will have different views on whether the public sector is more or less efficient than the private sector. This is partly explains why the size of the state may differ significantly over time or between countries. So the second point here is about resource efficiency. If government intervention brings about welfare loss, then there's no point government intervening. So government should just take its hand off and leave it for the free market to decide resource allocation. Do you get the point here? And if it is through the market failure, then it simply means government intervention is needed. So who uses resources well? The private sector or the public sector will determine how resources are allocated in that country. I think the point is clear.
Yep.
Then the next one is the austerity debate. The austerity debate. In the short term, some economies are still recovering from the effects of the financial crisis of 2007, 27 and 28, which saw government spending rise at the same time as tax revenue fell. Some governments have chosen to react or been forced to react by cutting public expenditure through austerity budgets. In some cases, the amount of interest paid on the national debt has increased, although for countries such as the UK and the USA, this increase has been relatively small because interest rates are falling to historical lows. A few governments have even been able to borrow money at negative rates of interest. So with the same value of national debt, changes in the rate of interest paid on these debts will change the pattern of public expenditure for economies, where fiscal deficits and national debt as a percentage of GDP remain high. However, there will be limits on any growth in public spending. This is discussed more fully. The austerity debates. Countries are trying to recover from the Great Depression. To recover, government have to come up with spending situation. Some governments are forced to spend. Some governments deliberately spend. But whichever way, government has to spend. And this spending comes through government borrowing also. So some government are even borrowing through negative interest rates because they need to borrow and they don't have any other choice. Because to recover the economy, aggregate demand has to increase. And for aggregate demand to increase, government spending has to increase. That's the point there. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
Then the next one is this disincentive. Okay, hold on, please. Okay, I'll just hold on, please. Pause. Disincentive or effect of taxation on welfare benefits. Being taxed at high rates, for example, 98% on income earned, is likely to discourage individuals from working or saving. Being provided with high levels of benefit for not working is equally likely to discourage work. Free market economists tend to argue that the disincentive effect of taxation on welfare benefits are so large that they outweigh any benefit that might arise from high levels of government spending. Therefore, the government should spend as little as a percentage of GDP as possible. The opposite view is that the tax and benefit system can be designed to minimize disincentive effects. For example, in Nordic countries, taxes are high and welfare benefits are generous. However, activity rates, the proportion of people in employment are also very high. These countries have similar rates of economic growth compared to lower tax and government spending countries such as the USA or the UK. The disincentive effect of taxation and welfare benefits. So the point here is that there's disincentive to work if taxes paid are high. There's disincentive to work if welfare payment is high. So it simply means government should come up with a balanced situation where taxes will be paid, where taxes that are paid would not become a disincentive to work or a disincentive or an incentive not to work. Do you get the point here? Do you get it or not? So the point about disincentive effects of taxation and welfare benefit is all about government coming up with a policy, fiscal policy, that would not discourage people from working and that would not encourage people from not taking a job.
I don't get the idea of high taxes, or like here it says Nordic countries are taxes are high and welfare benefits are generous. How does that work?
Yeah,
So,
it's
well, that means you'll be disincentivized of working from home.
no. The generosity means it's yeah, you are paying high taxes, but we are making it up for you with other benefits.
Okay.
So it simply means it's balanced. Yeah, you're paying high taxes, yes.
But when you go to the hospital, you don't pay anything.
Don't pay anything, or probably during your pension you get so much, for your pension. So government will allow you to pay more tax, but there's generosity when it comes to welfare payments too.
Okay.
Do you get it? So I think that by so doing, that would bring a balance in that situation compared to government charging too high tax or charging too much or less tax. Do you get it?
Yep.
So too much or too little is just a failure anyway. So government should try to strike a balance so that it will not create this disincentive. So now go to the significance of differing levels of public expenditure as a proportion of GDP. Differing levels of public expenditure can have an impact on a large number of economic variables, such as productivity and growth, crowding out and levels of taxation. This will now be considered one. The first one I'm going to talk about is productivity and growth. All economists agree that government can be inefficient in the way they spend taxpayers' money, but equally, private sector's firms can be inefficient too. But equally, private sector's firms can be inefficient. Okay, but equally, private sector's firms can be inefficient too. As a result, economists are divided about the impact of government spending on productivity and growth. For free market economists, they argue that government can never be as efficient as the private sector. They argue that public sector spending is often wasteful and inefficient because a government lacks the profit motive. In the private sector, firms will drive down cost, productive efficiency in order to maximize profit. They will produce goods and services which consumers wish to buy, allocative efficiency through the market mechanism or the price mechanism. So private firms will also innovate. Private firms will also be innovative and seek out new products to sell dynamic efficiency. So before we go further, now let's quickly talk about the differences between the private sector and the public sector here. So the argument towards the public sector is that the government is not productive efficient, government is not allocative efficient, government is not dynamic efficient. And the reason for this is that government doesn't have any motive to make profit. Government only wants to produce goods and services irrespective of you want it or not. In as much as the law says we should provide it, government is going to provide it. So that simply means government might as well spend taxpayers' money in a way that taxpayers do not want. Some people have cars. They don't need public transportation. They pay tax. Government is using taxpayer money to provide public transportation. That is misallocation of resources because those who pay tax do not want that. But government does not care about that. That is misallocation. That's allocative inefficiency. Government will produce goods without even putting into consideration the numbers of people that's going to take them. Waste, productive inefficiency. Government would not think about technological advancement. because government, it's out of government budgets,
Mm.
the dynamic inefficiency. So all in all, government is not productive, and government intervention would not bring about economic growth.
Mhm.
So that is the argument against government. But for the private sector, the private sector is inefficient too. But for the fact that the private sector has a profit motive,
Mhm.
it simply means the private sector would want to be dynamic efficient, would want to be productive efficient, would want to be allocative efficient. The private sector would want to be productive efficient because it would want to cut down cost as low as possible. The private sector will be allocative efficient because it wants to produce goods and services for those who need those goods and services. Allocative efficiency. The private sector will think about innovative ideas, will think about developing new products, new services. The private sector will be dynamic efficient. So that's the difference between the public sector and the private sector. So in summary, the private sector will be more productive than the public sector. I think the point there is clear.
Yeah.
Is it clear? So on the other hand, it can be argued that with the right controls and incentive in place, government can be a cost-effective and efficient provider. Now, this is the argument in support of the public sector. Government can be cost-effective and efficient provider. It can also be argued that the public sector provides goods and services vital to productivity and growth, which the private sector would otherwise not do. For example, a high-quality education system increases the human capital of the working population today and in the future. Now, the first argument in support of the public sector is that the public sector would provide goods and services that would enhance productivity for the private sector, which the private sector would deliberately not provide. Example is investment in quality education. The public sector, because it's a merit good, the public sector might provide education, quality education, which simply means it adds value to the human capital, which in turn would increase productivity for the private sector. That's the first argument in support of the public sector. The second one, a comprehensive healthcare system means that workers suffer a few days lost from serious illness, so absenteeism would reduce, which simply means with public health care, workers of the private sector would have access to health services, which means they won't be absent at work, and as a result, productivity would increase with the private sector. The private sector would never want to override workplace after they have done.
Mhm.
So comprehensive healthcare, this is also a support in the public sector. The third one, a well-targeted benefit system can encourage those out of work to gain jobs. So look at the point. It said a well-targeted benefit system can encourage those out of work to gain jobs. So with government benefits, it could be unemployment benefit anyway, but with unemployment benefit, certain individuals who are unemployable might as well use those benefits to their own advantage by acquiring skills or qualification that would make them employable. And that makes them employable for the private sector. An efficient road system encourages trade and specialization and lower cost for firms. Government providing roads, government providing road network, that can also reduce the cost for private sector. And the last one, regional aid will help stimulate economic activity in areas of the country with relatively high unemployment and increased GDP. There's one called regional development. So, irrespective of whichever region it is, in as much as it's part of the country, the government has the duty to ensure that whatever is being gotten in the urban area is being gotten in that area too. So that's regional development. So government is the only institution that's going to work on that. The private sector would not, because it's not profitable for them.
Yeah.
You get it? So that's about the argument against the public sector and the argument against the public sector, which becomes the support for the private sector, and the argument against the private sector, which is support of the public sector. Now go to the next one, crowding out. Are you there? Same thing. Okay. If the economy is at full employment and on its production possibility frontier, it will seem logical to suggest that increasing government spending by $1 must lead to $1 less of private sector spending. In figure 2, an increase in public sector spending of AB must lead to a fall in private sector spending of CD. The movement along the PPF from E to F shows, okay, this PPF shows clearly that extra public spending will crowd out private sector spending, taking the example of Sweden. So the point about crowding out is that government spending would reduce private sector spending. And that's the point they're making here. So look at here, look at the graph here.
The PPF.
Yeah, the PPF. So the PPF, they said if the economy is at full employment, that means there's no unemployed resources. But using the PPF within the frontier, they said an increase in public sector spending of AB will crowd out CD. So that means it will reduce private sector spending to J because government is taking charge. And that is not good for government. It's just increasing government spending instead of the private sector. So however, if there's unemployment and the economy is at G, a move to PPF can give both extra public sector and private sector spending. If the economy is at G, that's inside the PPF, it can as well give both the private sector and public sector extra. So the point about this is that if government has to spend, government must spend where it deems necessary, not where the private sector can as well spend. Because if government is spending where the private sector can spend, it's a waste of resources, waste of taxpayer money. And you get the point they're making there?
Yeah.
So here they said clear that extra public spending will crowd out private sector spending, taking the example of Sweden, okay? Yeah, they said crowding out can also occur at less than full employment through the financial market. Financial crowding out occurs when the public sector borrows extra money to fund increased public expenditure or reduce taxes. This extra borrowing increases interest rates because there is an increase in demand for borrowed funds. High interest rates discourage private sector borrowing for both our consumption and investment. So private sector spending falls. Now, another crowding out is through the financial institution. When we started the class, I talked about increasing deficits that bring about increasing national debt. Yes or no? So if one of the problems about increasing national debt is that it increases the cost of borrowing. Because if government continue to demand for it or for loan through the financial institutions, it simply means loans will not be available for the private sector. And that makes the price of credit increases. Do you get the point I'm making here? So because credit availability is less, based on the fact that government continue to demand for loans, that makes interest rates to increase. And that is not good for the private sector because private sector that relies mostly on borrowing for investment would not be able to do that. And that reduces private sector spending. And that is also crowding out. So whatever brings about reduction in private sector spending or private sector spending is a crowding out. Do you get the point here? Government continues to spend more, and that reduces private sector spending. It's crowding out. Government continues to take more loans, which in turn reduces private sector spending through loans. It's also crowding out. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
However, there are numbers of reasons why public sector spending need not crowd out private sector spending. One, transfer payments. Transfer payment does not have any impact on private sector because it's a payment that does not deal with production of goods and services. And the private sector would need to produce goods and services. Did you get the point here? Let me read anyway. $1 spent on transfer payment does not necessarily crowd out private sector spending. This is because there's no corresponding output. Like I told you earlier, the private sector would have to spend on inputs to produce goods and services that has to be sold. So transfer payment is not part of it. So government transfer payments does not have any impact on what the private sector wants to spend on. So for example, if the government gives $1 billion or $1 billion extra to the unemployed and pays for that by raising taxes on workers by $1 billion, there's not necessarily any crowding out. The private sector will continue to produce the same level of goods and services as before. It is just that it will produce an extra $1 billion for sale to the unemployed and $1 billion less to workers. So transfer payment would rather allow private sector to produce more than to spend less. Does it make sense?
Yep.
The second one, unemployment. If the economy is suffering from unemployment, then extra government spending could lead to crowding in, not crowding out. This means that extra government spending leads to higher private sector spending through the multiplier effect. In figure 2, if the economy is initially at G, higher government spending could lead to economy moving to either E or F. It moves to F, then an extra HB government spending counts in JD private sector spending. So if the economy is suffering from unemployment, extra government spending would rather help bring about multiplier effects. And that would in turn help private sector to increase their output. Because spending would increase, purchasing power of household would increase. And that's the multiplier effect. So the government increases its investment spending. As a result, the PPF of the economy moves outward and the economy moves to the point F. That's outward shift in PPF, and that increases aggregate demand too. Increased public sector spending then results in extra private sector spending. Free market economies would tend to disagree with this argument. One, they said, yeah, the free market will not agree with government spending anyway, because the free market will not agree with government spending and will not agree with government policy, because they believe government spending deters them or makes them not to be efficient. And government policies are always against the private sector. So what is the argument now? Let's check. The first one, increase taxes. For example, on workers or company profit to pay for higher welfare payments will discourage workers from working and companies from making profits. Therefore, the economy will shrink in size, reducing private sector spending. So increases in transfer payment by government lead to falling private sector spending. So the first argument against government spending through transfer payments is that transfer payments means disincentive for work. And especially if this transfer payment is funded through taxpayer money. So it simply means government would have increased corporation tax, would have increased income tax before increasing transfer payments. So if government increases income tax, it becomes a disincentive for workers to want to work. They wouldn't want to increase their working hour because they are paying more in taxes. That discourages them from getting a job because they can as well stop the job and get transfer payment from government. If government increases corporation tax because it wants to fund transfer payments, that reduces profit because there's inverse relationship between profit and tax, which is an item in cost of production. Okay. So if government is increasing transfer payments because in respect or at the detriment of corporation tax, it simply means the private sector will be discouraged to increase their spending or would be discouraged to produce further. So that is the first argument through the free market economies. The second one, they said the multiplier is very low, if not zero. If the government attempts to increase its spending and borrows the money to do so, interest rates will rise and this will reduce private sector spending. If it prints the money to finance the extra spending, there will be higher inflation, which will cut real private sector spending. If there's high unemployment, the solution is to reduce government spending in order to reduce taxes because of inflation. High inflation reduces spending. So the reduction in taxes will incentivize workers to work harder and firms to produce more. The private sector will then increase employment and so unemployment will fall. So the multiplier is very low or is zero or very low here because if government increases its spending through borrowing, it simply means interest rates would increase. And if interest rate increases, firms would not be able to borrow from the financial institutions for investment. And as a result of that, private sector spending would fall. But if there's high unemployment rate, the solution is not for government to increase spending. It should rather reduce its spending. Because reducing spending through unemployment benefit means individuals would be incentivized to seek for employment, to work hard. And working hard means more money for individuals. And more money for individuals means more income and more purchasing power.
Mm-hmm.
And that would increase spending. And in turn, it would increase private sector output, which means the demand for goods and services would increase and demand for labor would increase. So that's the argument against government spending here.
Mm-hmm.
That is, if government wants to spend through borrowing. The first one is about government spending on taxation. Are you with me?
Yes.
The first argument is about government spending through taxation. Using taxpayer money for public spending is not ideal because it reduces it reduces production for private firms because they have to pay more taxes, and that reduces their profitability. That disincentivizes them from producing.
Mm.
If government has to borrow for transfer payment, it simply means credit availability will reduce for the private sector, or they have to pay high interest rates on borrowing, and that would be disincentive for them to produce. So that simply means government should cut spending whenever there's unemployment, because it allows individuals to start thinking about finding a job. I think it's clear. Now we go on to government spending on investments. They said government spending on investment is often wasteful and badly targeted. The result is that the government wastes money and fails to increase the productive potential of the economy. The private sector is far better placed to seek out profitable opportunities that will increase the size of the economy. Less government spending and more private sector spending is therefore key to long-term economic success. Government spending on investments is seen to be badly targeted because governments are not technocrats. They are not economists. They are not business people. They might not understand where and what to spend on, unlike the private sector. The private sector can carry out a feasibility study before spending. The private sector would only spend if it's profitable. So the private sector spending is likely to lead to economic success, long-term economic success, than government spending. And that is the point there.
Right.
These are all arguments in support of the free market. Levels of taxation, are you there?
Yep. If government spending is
High, yes. If government is spending a high proportion of GDP, this is only sustainable in most cases if tax revenues are also a high proportion of the GDP. There are exceptions to this, such as oil-rich countries where revenues from oil pay for most government spending. So I think that's all. So for levels of taxation, so yeah, government rely mostly on revenue through taxes to fund its spending. So if government spending is through taxation, then there's no problem. But most of the time, there's always exception, which simply means most of oil-rich countries, the taxes there are low. That simply means it's not sustainable with low tax, government spending would not increase. So government fund its spending through oil revenue. And that's the exemption. But countries that do not have oil, what do? They have to do more taxes. So that ends chapter 34, public expenditure. Then we have the exam practice question to do. And that ends the live session for today. Thank you, everyone that tuned in. See you again next time. Bye. Cheers. And Ramadan Mubarak. Yeah, we'll stop here. And now, yeah, we end it.